Welcome back to the Better Humans Project podcast. I'm Greg Pfeiffer, and today we're going into territory that I think is genuinely underappreciated. Maybe one of the most practical and transformative topics this podcast has ever touched. We're talking about emotional intelligence. Now, I know that phrase gets thrown around a lot. Self help books, corporate workshops, leadership seminars. Emotional intelligence, or EI, is everywhere. But I want to do something different today. I want to strip away the buzzword and actually get into the substance. What is it really? Why does the science say it matters so much? And what are the different ways researchers have understood it? And most importantly, can you actually build it? Can you develop it, grow it, and make yourself genuinely better at it? The answer, I'm glad to tell you, is yes. And by the end of this episode, you'll have a very clear picture of how. So let's get into it. Now, let's start at the beginning. The term emotional intelligence was popularized in the mid 1990s by psychologist Daniel Goleman, whose book on the subject became one of the best selling psychology books of all time. But the foundational academic work was done slightly earlier by researchers Peter Salovey and John Mayer, who defined EI as the ability to perceive, use, understand, manage, and handle emotions. Notice what that definition is saying. It's not saying emotional intelligence is about being nice, calm, or positive. It's about ability. It's a set of skills, specific, learnable, measurable skills related to how we process emotional information. So here's a simple way I like to think about it. IQ, traditional intelligence, measures how well your brain processes facts, logic, and abstract reasoning. Emotional intelligence measures how well your brain processes feelings, your own and other people's. And here's what decades of research have made very clear. In most areas of life that actually matter, relationships, leadership, resilience, decision making, mental health, EI is a stronger predictor of success and well being than IQ alone. So now this ties in with a previous episode where I discussed high road and low road processing. So you might want to go and have a listen to episode 34 after this. So, in summary, emotional intelligence is the ability to accurately perceive emotions, to use emotions to facilitate thought, to understand emotional meanings, and to manage emotions, both in yourself and in others. It is a set of skills, not a fixed trait. So, why does emotional intelligence matter? Let me give you a sense of the scope here because the research is genuinely remarkable. In the workplace, studies have consistently found that higher emotional intelligence is associated with better job performance across almost every industry and role. One landmark study found that emotional intelligence accounted for 58% of performance in all types of jobs. Salespeople with a higher EI outsell their peers. Leaders with higher EI produce more engaged teams, lower staff turnover, and stronger organizational cultures. In relationships, both personal and professional, EI is strongly linked to relationship satisfaction, effective conflict resolution, and the capacity to build trust. People who can accurately read emotional signals, who manage their own reactivity, and who respond with empathy rather than defensiveness are simply better to be around. And they report higher relationship satisfaction themselves. In terms of mental health, research shows that people with higher EI experience lower rates of anxiety and depression, greater resilience in the face of stress, and faster recovery from setbacks. This makes intuitive sense. If you can understand and regulate your own emotional states, you are far less likely to be overwhelmed by them. And physically, and this might surprise you, EI is linked to better physical health outcomes. People who manage their emotions well have lower cortisol levels, lower rates of cardiovascular disease, and even stronger immune function. So, emotions are not separate from the body, they are expressed through the body. Learning to work with them rather than against them has measurable physiological effects. So, in summary, a higher EI is associated with better job performance and leadership outcomes, stronger relationships and communication, lower anxiety, depression, and burnout, greater resilience and faster recovery from adversity, and measurably better physical health. It is arguably one of the highest leverage areas of personal development. Now, let's go a bit deeper into the psychological underpinnings. Understanding why AI works the way it does makes it much easier to build. The foundational insight comes from neuroscience. The human brain has an ancient, fast acting emotional processing system centered largely in the amygdala, and a more recent, slower, deliberative system in the prefrontal cortex. The amygdala is your alarm system. It detects threats, generates emotional responses, and can trigger the fight, flight, or freeze reaction in milliseconds, often before your conscious mind has registered what's happening. This is what psychologist Daniel Goleman famously called the amygdala hijack. When you've ever said something in anger that you immediately regret, snapped at someone you love under pressure, or frozen completely in a high stakes moment, that was your amygdala running ahead of your prefrontal cortex. The emotional brain overrode the thinking brain. So, emotional intelligence at its neurological core is about strengthening the connection and communication between the two systems. It's about developing the capacity for what researchers call affect regulation, the ability to notice an emotional response as it's arising and choose how to work with it rather than being automatically driven by it. And this is deeply connected to what psychologists call metacognition, thinking about thinking, or in this case, it's feeling about feeling. When you can observe your own emotional state with some degree of clarity and distance, you gain choice, and choice is freedom. So, in short, EI is grounded in the interplay between the emotional brain, the amygdala, and the rational brain, the prefrontal cortex. Developing EI means strengthening your capacity to notice emotional responses as they arise and respond with intention rather than react automatically. Now, this is a trainable skill, and the brain is genuinely plastic in this domain. Now, there are different models of EI, and researchers have actually debated quite vigorously about exactly what emotional intelligence is and how to best measure it. And there are three main models worth knowing about. The first is the ability model from Salovey, Mayer, and Caruso. Now, this is the original academic model, and it treats EI as a genuine cognitive ability, like verbal or mathematic reasoning, that can be tested objectively. And it identifies four branches arranged from most basic to most complex. There is perceiving emotions, then it's the ability to accurately read emotions in faces, voices, images, and other people's body language. And this is the foundation. Using emotions, the ability to harness emotional states to facilitate cognitive tasks. Knowing, for example, that mild anxiety can sharpen focus or that a positive mood promotes creative thinking. Understanding emotions, knowing how emotions work, how they evolve, blend, escalate, and shift. Understanding that frustration can become rage, or that grief and relief can coexist. And managing emotions, the most complex branch. And this is the ability to regulate your own emotional states and influence the emotional states of others with skill and intentionality. The second model is the mixed model from Goleman. So Daniel Goleman's model broadened the concept to include traits and competencies alongside abilities. And he identified 5 domains: self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills. Now, this model is less precisely defined than the ability model, but it's more practical for organizational and leadership contexts, which is why it became so widely adopted in business settings. And third is the trait model from Petrides. The trait model, developed by K.V. Petrides, treats AI as a constellation of emotional self-perceptions, how you see yourself in relation to emotions. This is measured through self-report rather than performance testing, and it captures things like emotional expressivity, adaptability, and perceived social competence. It's distinct from the ability model in that it measures emotional self-concept rather than actual skill. So which model is right? Well, each model captures something real. The ability model is the most scientifically rigorous, whereas Goleman's model is perhaps the most practically applied. The trait model captures important aspects of emotional self-perception. So for our purposes today, we'll draw most heavily from the 4-branch ability model because it most clearly shows us what skills we can develop. So how do we build and develop emotional intelligence? So here is what I find most exciting about AI. Unlike IQ, which is largely fixed, emotional intelligence is genuinely developable. The brain's neuroplasticity means that consistent practice really does change the neural pathways involved in emotional processing. You are not stuck with the EI you have. You can grow it. And here's how. 1. Develop emotional literacy, which is name what you feel. The most foundational skill in AI is the ability to accurately identify your own emotional states. Psychologist Lisa Feldman Barrett's research found that people who have a richer emotional vocabulary, what she calls high emotional granularity, experience emotions more precisely and regulate them more effectively. There is a real difference between feeling bad and being able to say, I feel a low grade dread about tomorrow's conversation with some sadness underneath. That precision gives you something to work with. Practice. When you notice an emotional shift, pause and name it specifically. Not just stressed or upset, reach for precision. Use an emotion wheel if you need one. Over time, this becomes second nature. Then you can build self awareness through regular reflection. Now, self awareness is the cornerstone of Goleman's model, and for good reason. If you can't see your emotional patterns, you can't change them. Journaling, therapy, mindfulness, and honest feedback from trusted people are all evidence based pathways to deeper self awareness. Ask yourself regularly, what triggers me? What emotional habits do I fall to under pressure? What do I feel in my body before I even register an emotion consciously? 3. Practice the pause. Interrupt the amygdala hijack. Developing the habit of pausing before reacting is one of the single most impactful EI practices. Viktor Frankl wrote that between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space lies our freedom. EI is largely about enlarging that space. When you feel a strong emotional reaction arising, try this. Name what you're feeling, take 3 slow breaths, and ask yourself what a thoughtful response would look like. And this sounds simple. It is simple, but it's also deeply difficult under pressure, which is why it requires practice, not just intention. 4 is cultivate empathy deliberately. Empathy is the ability to sense and understand another person's emotional experience. It's not just a personality trait that some people are born with, it's a skill and it can be cultivated. The practice involves genuinely listening without preparing your response, asking open questions with real curiosity, paying attention to nonverbal cues, and actively working to imagine life from another person's perspective. Perspective taking exercises, literally trying to write or speak from another person's point of view, has been shown in research to meaningfully increase empathic accuracy. 5. Learn to regulate, not suppress. Now, here's a crucial distinction. Emotional regulation is not the same as emotional suppression. Research by James Gross shows that suppression, pushing feelings down and presenting a false front, actually increases psychological stress. It impairs memory and cognition and damages relationships. Regulation, by contrast, means working with emotions intelligently. Techniques include cognitive reappraisal, changing how you interpret a situation, expressive writing, processing emotions through writing, somatic regulation, using breath, movement, and body awareness to modulate emotional states, and seeking social support, which research consistently shows is one of the most effective ways human beings regulate emotion. 6. Get feedback and stay curious. Now, one of the hardest but most valuable practices in EI development is actively soliciting honest feedback about how others experience you emotionally. Now, this might come from a therapist, a coach, a trusted partner, or a close colleague. And the gap between how we think we come across emotionally and how we actually come across is often significant. Curiosity about that gap, rather than defensiveness, is itself a sign of emotional intelligence. And it's the gap that holds the most growth. So, now to your weekly challenge. And this week, it's emotional check in practice. So, 3 times each day this week, morning, midday, and evening, stop for 60 seconds and do an emotional check in. Ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? Name it as precisely as you can, not just fine or stressed, but something specific. Where do I feel it in my body? What might have contributed to this feeling? Then simply note it in your worksheet, your phone, a notebook, and move on. No judgment, no fixing, just noticing. At the end of each day, look back at your 3 check-ins. Are there patterns, triggers you didn't notice in the moment, feelings that shifted? This is the foundational practice of emotional literacy, and 7 days of it, done honestly, will begin to change how you relate to your inner life. And this is how it starts, not with dramatic insight, consistent honest attention. 7 days, 3 minutes a day, do it. Welcome back. Before I wrap up, let me walk you through the companion worksheet for this episode. So, the worksheet for this episode is divided into 3 parts, and I'd encourage you to approach it with the same spirit we've brought to this conversation. Be honest, curious, and without judgment. Part 1 invites you to reflect on your own emotional intelligence as it stands today. You'll find questions that help you locate yourself across the 4 branches of the ability model: perception, use, understanding, and management of emotion, and a self-rating scale for each. Don't overthink these. Your first instinct is usually closest to the truth. There's also space to identify your emotional triggers and default patterns under pressure. Now, this is self-awareness work, and it's the foundation of everything else is built. Part 2 is your 7-day emotional check-in log, the structure for your weekly challenge. Now, there are 3 check-in slots for each day with prompts for naming the emotion, locating it in the body, and noting what may have contributed to it. At the bottom of each day's section is a brief reflection prompt. I genuinely believe that if you complete this log honestly over 7 days, you will know yourself better at the end of it than you do right now. And that's not a small thing. Part 3 is a short end of week synthesis, a few questions to help you consolidate what you've noticed. Identify the AI skills you most want to develop and make a specific commitment about how you'll continue this work beyond the week. The goal is not just awareness, it's growth. And growth requires commitment to something beyond insight alone. So let me bring it all home now. Today we explored emotional intelligence from the ground up. We defined it as the ability to perceive, use, understand, and manage emotions in ourselves and in others. Not a fixed personality trait, but a genuine set of learnable skills. We looked at why it matters, the research connecting EI to job performance, relationship quality, mental health, resilience, and even physical well-being is genuinely compelling. And this is not soft science. It's some of the most practically significant psychology of the last 30 years. And we went into the neuroscience, the interplay between the fast, reactive amygdala and the deliberative prefrontal cortex, and understood the amygdala hijack not just as a character flaw, but as a biological reality we can learn to work with. We explored the 3 main models of AI: the rigorous ability model of Salovey and Mayer, Goleman's influential mix model with its 5 competency domains, and the trait-based model of Petrides. And we got very practical about how to build AI through emotional literacy, self-awareness practices, the discipline of the pause, deliberate empathy, healthy emotion regulation, and the humility to seek real feedback. Emotional intelligence is not about being emotionally perfect. It's not about never getting angry, never feeling afraid, never struggling. It's about being in an honest, skillful relationship with your emotional life. It's about having the inner resources to meet what life brings in yourself and in the people around you, with presence, wisdom, and care. That is a lifelong practice. But today, this week, you can begin. So your challenge is simple and powerful. 3 emotional check-ins a day for 7 days. Name what you feel, notice where you feel it. Stay curious about what's underneath and use the worksheet to hold yourself to it. So thank you for being here and thank you for doing this work because the world generally needs people who are doing this work. People who are trying to understand themselves better so they can show up better for the people they love, the communities they're part of, and the world they're helping to shape. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it and tag us in your socials, leave a comment where able, or reach out. If you'd like a copy of the accompanying worksheet or simply want to share your story or even like to be a guest on the podcast, reach out at contact@thebetterhumansproject.com. This is Greg Pfeiffer, and this is the Better Humans Project podcast. So let's keep building better humans together. Take care.